and as an added benefit, we have added our consultant from the Illinois Math and Science Academy, which we have been consulting with for almost 2 years now. This is a year that we implemented the program, the IMSA Math, which we call Accelerated Math, that begins at the 10th grade level. And this is Dr. Janice Krause, and she will be explaining to you why we made the hard decision to do this and why we are very proud of the decision that we've made and the difficulties we've had with it, but also what the benefits that we reap from going a step further than what most of the other places have been. So, without further ado, and Janice has a whole lot of things to tell you. Like, she started on this trip yesterday morning and arrived at about 3 p.m. or 2 p.m. to this afternoon. She has no luggage, and she is in what she came in, and we are thrilled to have her in jeans, aren't we?
Thank you. So I'm not in my professional mode here, my sneaker, but we'll do the best we can. All right.
Should we unplug the machines?
Is this still going? No, it's on.
There it is.
Oh, it's coming.
There.
Anyone needs headphones?
Yeah, that would be.
Probably would be. I guess I have to. Is there a remote or?
No, I can sit there and I'll do it for you.
Okay.
Neighbor's the remote.
She's my remote.
Your own personal assistant.
You knew what I was going after.
Well, thank you for having me. As Marlene said, my name is Dr. Janice Krause, and this is my 16th year at the Academy and my 23rd year in teaching, and I'm 29. So I would like to, I know what this crowd is because I know these faces, so I know I have some teachers here, and I understand I have some parents. Parents? Thank you for being here, and I assume a couple students over there, right? Excellent. All right, so my goal for our short time together is to kind of give the rationale for the approach to this program and what the experience is like for the students, and as well as hear from the parents in particular and what your perspective is from what you're hearing from your students, what your concerns are, and do my best to address those from a perspective of a little further down the line of being involved in a program like this. I'm very involved at the national level in the leading teacher and leadership in math education organizations, fresh from the conference, so I have some things that I can share with you from that as well in terms of what the current thinking is at that level. So I start off really with a question because I sense there are concerns from Marlene, but I really don't know exactly what they are. So my question for you is, what do you remember about your math classes? Because it tends to be what we hold as an expectation that gives rise to our excitement or our concerns about what our children are experiencing. So I want to hear from some of you at least to what you remember about your math class. Is it a positive memory? No, definitely not. Okay, so because you apparently have strong memories, even if they were bad, what left you with those horrible memories?
Like I don't understand this. I hate math.
Okay.
So I'm going to pick.
Can you hear her?
Yeah.
Okay.
I can be louder if you want. Be very loud. Yeah, and just not understanding how to do it, or understanding why it's important.
Right. Anything else?
The endless repetition. Like when you did get it and you just had to keep doing.
So now you're bored.
Right.
Any other things you want to offer? So that's not uncommon, what I've heard. I also think, and I heard this summed up kind of struck a chord with me that I remember it, that, you know, there are students around us who say, I hate math, or I'm no good at math, or some sort of negative comment about math. And it seems to be summed up in the fact that math to them is a bunch of rules they have to follow in order to get an answer, the answer. And that's all that really mattered, whether they understood the rules or not. And so because those rules often made no sense, didn't follow any kind of logic, weren't connected to anything, if they remembered them long enough to do well on the test, that was a win. And then if they ever needed that again, it often wasn't there, or it wasn't there strong enough to help further learning. And maybe that's what led you to your, I don't remember liking math. Maybe you did, you forgot, right? But we'll go, you just didn't like it. So, you know, there are a lot of people, I think, that I've encountered who think that you either are a math person or you're not, and have some sort of meaning in their heads about what that means to be a math person. And yet, there's a lot of classrooms in our country that are still looking a whole lot like they were when you were in them and hating them. And, you know, as you sit here and tell me it was a horrible experience, or I don't have positive memories of it, there has been this kind of paradoxical clinging to that kind of a classroom because it's what we know. And I think a lot of us as parents feel like I want it to be what I know, because then I feel like I can help my child, I feel like I can relate to what they're experiencing, and I feel like I might be more useful in helping them through it and not leave, hopefully, with such a negative connotation. But there's a lot of studies out there that are showing that's really not working. You probably have heard and maybe even read some of the research about how the United States children match up to some of our overseas counterparts. And so the question is, why are we still doing the same thing? So I want to share with you, Jeffrey Canada is an author and an educator and a Harvard grad, rather intelligent fellow who has done a lot of thinking about this, and he works primarily, he's the CEO and founder of an organization in Harlem, New York, that focuses on underprivileged children of the Harlem area and seeing them succeed, particularly in math. So I brought this, I'm going to share part of a TED Talk that he did, just to kind of generate some thinking. Oops, you got to click on the, you got to click on the link.
Oh.
The black line, the darker one of Jeffrey Canada.
There we go. They were here.
Just say okay. Did you hook these into my computer?
No. Did you not, Ashley?
No, you plugging it in.
Okay, give me 1 second. I'm good?
How big is my?
Are the speakers on?
Right there, baby, the power button to the left.
The angry black man. So I said, no, I'm going to be good, honey, I'm going to be good. I am, but I am angry. I'm a little nervous because my wife, Yvonne, said to me, she said, Jeff, you watch the TED Talk. I said, yes, honey, I love TED Talks. She said, you know they're like really smart, talented. I said, I know. She said, they don't want like the angry black man. So I said, no, I'm going to be good, honey, I'm going to be good. I am, but I am angry. And the last time I looked, this is why I'm excited when I'm angry. This year, there are going to be millions of our children that we're going to needlessly lose. That we could, right now, we could save them all. You saw the quality of the educators who were. Tell me they could not reach those kids and save them. I know they could. It is absolutely possible. Why haven't we fixed this? Those of us in education have held on to a business plan that we don't care how many millions of young people fail. We're going to continue to do the same thing that didn't work. And nobody is getting crazy about it, right? Enough to say enough is enough. So here's a business plan that simply does not make any sense. You know, I grew up in the inner city, and there were kids who were failing in schools 56 years ago when I first went to school. And those schools are still lousy today. 56 years later. And you know something about a lousy school? It's not like a bottle of wine, right? Where you say like 87 was like a good year, right? That's not how this thing. I mean, every single year, it's still the same approach, right? One size fits all. If you get it, fine, and if you don't, tough luck. Just tough luck. Why haven't we allowed innovation to happen? Do not tell me we can't do better than this. Look, you go into a place that's failed kids for 50 years, and you say, so what's the plan? And they say, well, we're going to do what we did last year, this year. What kind of business model is that? Banks used to open and operate between 10 and 3. They operate 10 to 3. They will close for lunch hour. Now, who can bank between 10 and 3? The unemployed. They don't need banks. They got no money in the banks. Who created that business model, right? And it went on for decades. You know why? Because they didn't care. It wasn't about the customers. It wasn't about it. It was about bankers. They created something that works for them. How could you go to the bank when you were at work? It didn't matter. Then they don't care whether or not Jeff is upset he can't go to the bank. Go find another bank. They all operate the same way, right? Now, one day, some crazy banker had an idea. Maybe we should keep the bank open when people come home from work. They might like that. What about a Saturday? What about introducing technology? Now look, I'm a technology fan, but I have to admit to you, I'm a little old. So I was a little slow, and I did not trust technology. And when they first came out with those new contraptions, these tellers that you put in a card and they give you money, I was like, there's no way that machine is going to count that money right. I'm never using that, right? So technology has changed. Things have changed. Yet, not in education. Why? Why is it that when we had rotary phones, when we were having folks being crippled by polio, that we were teaching the same way that we're doing right now? And if you come up with a plan to change things, people consider you radical. They will say the worst things about you. I said one day, well, look, if the science says this is so.
I know he's engaging, but you can go Google him and watch the rest of it. So let me get back to this. And Steve Leinwand is another name you'll see I have referenced several times here. He was a former education leader and administrator, and now works for an organization called AIR in Washington, D.C. He is contracted frequently by National Council of Teachers of Mathematics and National Council of Supervisors of Mathematics in their publications. And because of his time out at AIR, does a lot of math education research. And I understand that the state of South Carolina has recently removed itself from the Common Core umbrella. However, I will still say a few things about that, whether you love it or hate it. There are some interesting effects that it is likely to have, even in its early days now. And They are things that we've been thinking about at the Academy long before anybody breathed words of the Common Core. And I think you will agree that they are things that you would want for your children, whether they are mathematically inclined or not. Okay? Go ahead, Marlene. So, some things that I found myself thinking and reflecting over after I watched the TED Talk. Carol Dweck is a brain researcher, and she has a book called Mindset. And the premise of this book is we all kind of have our attitudes and things that we hold, and maybe being good at math is among them for some of us, or not being a math person. And a lot of that, go ahead, comes from two ideas. She talks about a fixed mindset, which is that where I pretty much have the talents I have, I know what I'm going to know, and I really can't do much about it. Versus a growth mindset where talent and the skill sets that you currently have are just the beginning. And given the right opportunities and environments, growth can occur. And that is really the mindset that drives the Common Core today. It certainly drives the program that was written at IMSA back in the late 80s, really, when the first set of standards emerged from the National Council of Teachers of Mathematics. And if you hold those next to the Common Core practice standards, there's a whole lot of overlap there. And I think the reason that or at least one of the reasons that Common Core has generated so much more movement is because there are these big assessments tied to them. Nobody was assessing the principles and standards back in the late 80s and early 90s. And it's interesting, I find it paradoxical because although those assessments are driving a whole lot more movement in the math education and in classrooms, it's also driving a whole lot more controversy because they're expensive. And I'll just say that. That's not what we're here about. Go ahead. So, this is also from Steve Limewan. But, you know, we hear, and I mentioned this earlier, about our ailing math classrooms. You know, and I know that you as parents have made a choice and probably a sacrifice to bring your children here, not only financially, but you're getting them here physically a lot. And there had to be something compelling you to do that about the schools that they were in. And you know, I have a similar situation. The school that I work for is located in the Chicago area. Illinois is a very long state, and we have kids who come to us from all over the state of Illinois. Now, we are residential, but again, it is a choice and a sacrifice, as you can imagine, to send your 10th grader away to essentially to a boarding school for the sake of a lot of our students who come from downstate are in schools where they would have run out of a math class to take because they are accelerated and they will run out of math before they're even a junior in high school. Maybe the math teachers that they have are only certified to 8th grade and they're trying to teach 9th and 10th grade mathematics. There are a host of other reasons, not just for the math program that we offer, but for other areas as well. And it is a decision that they make, and I'm sure toil with, as did you. And so I think there needs to be, along with that, well, maybe things ought to be different if I'm going to make this sacrifice. I don't want to send them away and then have the same old thing going on. I could have done that at home. So the Common Core, as I said, is kind of allowing this to happen. I started going to these national conferences probably around the early 2000s. And I sat there listening to these speakers talk about how the classroom needs to be more engaging and it needs to be the students who are doing the talking and doing the math instead of watching the teacher. And I always say to my students that you shouldn't be watching me have all the fun. Look how much fun I'm having. Don't you want to have this kind of fun too? Because I have a ball teaching my classes. And I sat there thinking, oh my gosh, our entire program is designed to do this. And I marveled at the people who wrote it because I can't take credit for that. And they were essentially so ahead of their time, seeing the value in the students talking and bringing what they understand into the conversation. And how arrogant of us teachers, and I taught for 7 years in a very traditional setting, expecting these novices to just accept my very neatly organized, professional level understanding of the mathematics and say, here you go, now you do it. And that's what you experience. And you're like, what? And so if you give me a formula, okay, I can stick some numbers in and I can flip to the back of the book and see if I got the answer, but I didn't really learn anything. And then you're frustrated. So stay on that one if you would. So there are a couple documents that talk about the practice standards. There are lots of content standards, and I'm not going to even talk about those today. Not just because South Carolina is saying I'm not doing that, but it's just a whole other conversation. We know there's a lot of content that we want our kids to learn. But the practice standards are really about how we want our students to think. And this is the list I referred to earlier. I have yet to meet anybody who says, I don't care if my kid can persevere when there's a problem. And it's not just about a math problem, but math provides such a natural avenue to build these kinds of habits of mind. And I was just joking with Marlene, I don't think I've ever lost a real argument with my husband because I think this way. And being able to, I always think of it as the chess player, anticipating what my move is going to elicit from the opponent, if you will. And so to think of that about that and hear the argument of someone else and be able to critique that and say, well, and I expect this of my students. We watch each other solve problems, and I always joke because I'll make a mistake on the board, not usually intentionally, and I always joke, well, I was just seeing if anybody's paying attention. Right? Because I want them to be on top of, well, why couldn't you just do it that way? And when I grade their papers, I learn so much when I teach some of the upper level classes because they don't all approach it the same way. That's what you love to see as a teacher. They have brought what they understand, and sometimes they go, oh, I wish I would have thought of that. Right? And then I'll share it with the students because that increasing in elegance of solving a math problem is really what you want. But you can't expect all of your students to come up with that on their own at the beginning. They might not understand enough of the pre-lesson. So if they can make sense of a problem in a way that connects to what they already know, there's less frustration, it makes sense, and it might not be the most efficient way to do the problem. That's okay. That's my job to guide them toward a more efficient understanding, and then they can appreciate, well, I see you value how I did this, but I also see why your way looks a little better. And until they kind of embrace the need to do it a better way or a different way, they won't. And if they're not ready for it, maybe they shouldn't yet because you want the math to make sense to them. So how do you get these habits of mind to emerge? Because it's not like, well, my class now knows the quadratic formula. Check. Right? You just can't do that with these practice standards. They're more of a continuum and a way of seeing not only mathematics, but in my view, seeing the world. And I want my students to persevere. And sometimes, yes, I need them to pay attention to precision. Maybe you've heard about the scientist who was working for, I believe it was NASA, and had centimeters labeled where it was supposed to be inches, or maybe it was vice versa. It made a big difference financially. So, yeah, there is time to really pay attention to, are you getting the right answer, and have you done this in the best way possible? But that's not the end-all, be-all. And the emphasis is so much more now on getting to that solution, maybe looking at multiple solutions, looking at the same problem graphically, numerically, in tables, algebraically or analytically. And if you have a really rich task, your kids will be engaged in it for the entire, how long are your mod classes? 40? 90 minutes. Oh, right, you're doing the block. So, a really rich task could keep those kids engaged for at least half of that, and then allow the kids to present how they've approached this problem and let them see those connections of how all these representations come together. That's the beauty of it. That's a real mathematical thinker. So our approach really gets at this, and you can have a good curriculum, you can have a good book, but what happens in the classroom really makes a difference on how this comes to life and how the children react to it. So, the curriculum is designed for problem solving and reasoning and multiple representations, but those last two really can look different from classroom to classroom. I worked with a group of teachers at a school a little closer to me than this one several years ago, and so I was able to go and observe their teachers a little more often, and I can't walk in a classroom, it happened this afternoon, without talking to the kids. And so I listen to what they're doing, and I start questioning them. And the teacher who I was observing said, I found myself watching you and listening to the kinds of questions that you ask my students. I never asked questions like that. And it was such an aha moment to her, and it was something I really hadn't even thought of. When I read my student surveys in the fall, our students start at the 10th grade level at our school. And I often will get in the student comments, teacher doesn't teach, the teacher answers every question with a question, they expect us to figure everything out on our own. Maybe you've heard some of these comments, because I don't think they're unique to my school. And by the second semester, gone. And when we bring teachers in to interview at our school, we will often have them go into a class because we want to see them interact with the students. And so they come in with their neatly prepared lesson, and the kids, like, they don't even want to watch the teacher because they're like, just get out of my way and let me do my math. Because they get into this habit of wanting to have that conversation and think about it at their own pace and not just be shown how to do everything. And what's really fascinating is watching them help each other, because even that process emerges, and they start asking each other questions and answering questions with questions, and because they see us do it all the time. Now, I have a slight advantage because our whole curriculum kind of is like this, so the students, there's no escaping it. If they go to history, it's going to be the same way. It was a little more challenging when we took this out to the school just north of me, because it was only the math that was so different. But I think other areas are kind of getting on board. Yeah. So, hit one more for me. So I want you, as you look at these, those of you who said I had a horrible math experience, think if any of these things were true for you, and think about how this program and our fabulous teachers here can help change that for your children. So they forget, so we need a little more review. They see it differently. Your school, like mine, brings students together from different feeder schools, right? They've had different experiences prior to coming here. And so what one student might be really, really good at, another student may have had very little background in, and vice versa. So those conversations can be incredibly rich, because one student's background might have done everything from a very analytic, add it together, subtract, I have to do this on both sides kind of approach to math. Somebody else's teacher may have done things very visually, with graphics and animation, and bringing those two worlds together can be very enlightening for both students. This is just honoring those strengths. If I hand the same rich task to all of you, chances are you would start thinking about it differently too. And there isn't a right way to start the problem. The right way to start a problem is to engage with the material and bring and try to sort it out and figure, what do I know? What do I need to know to solve this problem? And where am I trying to go with it? And what your skills are going to be how you start. And so to honor those different approaches, and the teacher's job becomes to figure out, how are you starting that problem? What do you understand? What are your strengths that you're bringing that you can work on from that perspective? And how can I capitalize on that so that what I interact with you still makes sense? Not, oh no, don't do that, do this. Because then you feel like, well, thanks a lot. Right? And you're like, well, what I was trying was useless, and so I'm just going to stop. And it's very defeating. But if that child is engaged in the problem, their approach is the right one for that child, because that's how they understand the math. This one is more something we see at the elementary level, I think. I've never taught elementary school, but I hear the stories from my children. But I still see it somewhat at the high school. You give them a problem, and maybe it's, how long does it take the boat to cross the river, and they come up with like some ungodly amount of hours, and the river's only a mile wide, and they don't care. They got an answer, they're moving on, And that sense of number sense is really tricky. They have calculators now that they love. At my school, they're always on their computer with Wolfram Alpha. Are you familiar with Wolfram Alpha?
Oh, yes. I use it all the time.
Oh, there. See, they're familiar with Wolfram Alpha. They love it. But to have him stop and think, and sometimes, I just did a problem the other day with Usain Bolt, and he was running, he's the Olympic runner who did win the 100 and the 200, and it was a calculus problem about how fast he was going, and it was given in meters per second. And I just stopped and I said, do you have any sense of how fast that number is? Because my brain works in miles per hour. I don't really get how fast that number is in meters per second. Did anybody bother to convert it besides me? And it just gets them thinking like, oh, these problems are actually real and they mean something. I'm not just supposed to get to the answer and move on. And if you're curious, he was moving at about 23 miles an hour on average over the 200 meters. And if it's an average, he was actually going faster than that because he started from 0, right? So it was worth the conversion. Wow. Yeah. The vocabulary is another thing, and this is another way to think about precision. I think many of us, when we hear the word precision and math, you think the numbers, right? I have to have the right number of decimal places, I have to have the right label at the end, but the language is so important. We do a unit on matrices, we were just talking about that, and I start them off with this activity I actually thought about having you do tonight, but I wanted you to have me back. So we have the students move a triangle. It's actually a physical cutout triangle. And there's a sheet of paper that has a grid and this triangle on it in 2 different places. And I sit 2 of the kids back to back, and one is the teacher. And the teacher has to give directions to the student as to how to get the triangle from the first position to the other position. And it may involve movement to the left or the right or up or down. It may cause a reflection. It may cause a rotation. And I just let him go at it. And I have a third student who has to write down everything the teacher said. Now, this is usually the first or second day of class. And so I hear slide, flip, spin, not exactly the most mathematical of terms. And occasionally I'll hear the reflect and the translate and things of that sort. So I'm like, all right, let me hear recorders, let me all the verbs. And I just put them all on the board. And I let the kids group them. And we get to, all right, spin and rotate, and I don't know what else they come up with for that one. I'm like, well, which one do you think we ought to be using? Probably rotate. Good. Now from this point on, we're all rotating. We're not spinning anymore. And just to get that and model the conversation that you expect the mathematical language, it happens over time. It's not that we stop and say, all right, we're going to learn this word today. Right? We all want the vocabulary. And I learned a world language. That's how it was. And I can't speak the language now. And mathematics is a language. So it just has to be something that happens in an immersion kind of atmosphere. Ask why we need to know this. I think every math teacher has heard that question. Maybe some of you have asked it. Why am I ever going to need this? And that's about the tasks. And modeling is a big push in Common Core. And I don't remember the math books that I used. I've looked at them recently, and there are books out there that say they are aligned with Common Core. Well, I can tell you it is way too soon for books that are truly aligned to Common Core to be in publication. So, like the Victoria's Secret catalog, they changed the cover and sent it out again, right? So, but there are ideas. Why do we need to know this? Modeling, if it's a real-world problem, do you always have all the information you need to solve it? Not usually at the beginning, right? So part of modeling is, what do I even need to know to solve this problem? And how am I going to know if I get an answer that's reasonable? And can I build a mathematical representation of this problem so now that it becomes a problem to solve? Can I come up with an equation or an analytical format to help me solve this problem? Or maybe I need data. Maybe it's a database problem, and you bring the statistics into what is traditionally an Algebra 2 classroom, perhaps. All right, I'm going to let you shoot all of these up here. So in our program, whoopsie, yep. All right, so most of you have probably heard the students talking about problem sets. I know our parents hear about these a lot and up front early. They are designed to review past coursework, They are designed to provide some skill practice, because as much as we like this deep, rich thinking, there are procedures that have to be learned. They just aren't the only thing that have to be learned. And we even will kind of preview some ideas coming further down the line. And then there's just some really good problems in there, that they have all the tools, but it's not from today's lesson, therefore I do this, right? And that's what math and thinking about math is all about, is what tool do I bring to bear? The Math Investigations program does not spend 4 to 6 to maybe more weeks reviewing last year's course. It just doesn't, because sitting around and having the kids talk about math and bring what they have to bear takes longer. It really does. And so, but it will stick with them. So there really isn't all this need to reteach them what you taught them last year. But that doesn't mean they don't need to practice it. So the problem sets allow an avenue to bring those ideas back into their, I always call it the front burner, and keep those skills working so that they can use them to build and move forward. The teacher's role is very, very different. Like I said, I taught for 7 years in a very traditional paradigm, and I came to IMSA, and I was surrounded by this mode and the authors of this program, and I was kind of like, when in Rome, guess you do what they're doing in Rome. And I can remember that semester very vividly. It was very difficult. I was teaching all the same content, and it still felt like I was teaching something different. Every day is a new adventure. There is no planning this whole great scheme of a presentation and say, darn, I did that, a bang-up job. Look how nice it looks on the board. Because every time you teach it, students are going to react to it differently, and it's my job to know exactly where every one of you is long before I give a quiz. Quizzes are never, should be a surprise. I know who's struggling and I know where, and then I can bring them in and intervene before the assessment comes. I know the strengths of certain students, so I know how I can help other students help each other, and that's my job, and it's exhausting. And to watch an MI teacher, you walk in and you go, when are they ever going to teach? What's she doing? She's sitting down with the kids over there. I can tell you that job is so much harder than standing at the front of the room and presenting a lesson, because you are constantly reacting to what you hear. Sometimes, my mother taught me never read over people's shoulders, right? That's supposed to be, I do it all the time. I call it the MI hover, right? Because I walk around and look what you're doing, I listen to what you're saying, and if I don't like it, I ask you a question that will cause you to rethink what you just said. Oh, and what if I do this? Oh. Right? And you present something that's going to, maybe what she was thinking was working just fine for the problem she was on, but I know it's not really going to work all the time. So then I have to think of how I can present her with something that will cause a conflict with her strategy that will make her rethink it. Because if I just say, that's not always going to work. I'm like, it worked just fine here, go away, lady, I got the right answer, right? So it's always, it's kind of being comfortable with the unknown. And I have taught this curriculum for 16 years, and I still am not bored with it, because every group of kids in front of me make it different. Just about the time I figure, when do I need to intervene and when do I need to let them struggle, semester's over and I get all new kids, I have to start all over again. And that's what just keeps it fresh. Yes, I know where the kids tend to get caught up, and I can anticipate that differently than you can the first time, and that's worth a lot. But it's still, I still see solutions to problems that I've never seen before, different approaches to problems that I learned from, and different ways of thinking about things. So, my students are at their tables, and I'm watching them have all the fun. Now, that doesn't mean I'm not ever at the board. There is time for large group instruction, if that's what you want to call it, but it's always after they've grappled with the ideas first, so that they can actually contribute. They know what they don't quite get. They know if I ask something and they've already grappled with it, they feel really good about knowing how to answer the question. And again, then some of the students can hear what other people are struggling with or have already figured out. I have a question now for you, because I've been talking too much. When you hear the word assessment, what do you think of?
Tests and quizzes.
Tests and quizzes.
Standardized testing.
Those standardized tests, sure. And that's pretty common. But what I would argue you're thinking about is an evaluation. And in today's way of thinking about math education, the two are not exactly the same anymore. So an assessment doesn't always happen on a piece of paper or a computer or a calculator. But when I'm doing, as I described via my hover, I am assessing. So I'm assessing all 90 minutes. Or my classes aren't that long. Mine are only 70. But when I'm listening to that conversation, when I'm looking what you're writing down in your paper, I'm assessing you. I'm not evaluating you. But I know how to adjust my instruction because I understand where your structures are in terms of the math I need you to learn today and in terms of how you're connecting it with the math we learned last week, maybe even last semester. And it's ongoing. And the term formative assessment really means I'm giving you feedback, and then I expect you to do something with that feedback. So it might be this informal conversation that I will have with the students, the question I ask to make you rethink your approach to a problem. It might be the more traditional quizzes and tests. But what do I expect my students to do when I hand them back? If it's just stick it in their binder, it's not formative assessment. Now it's an evaluation, like the high stakes test, sadly. Right? There are some really good questions, whether you ever take those smarter balanced assessments or not. There's a lot of really good questions on those tests that I would encourage you to explore. There are a lot of them online available. You'll see the kind of thinking that our students are going to be expected to do, whether they are going to formally take those tests or not. That's what the world is demanding. You know, we are preparing our children for fields and careers that don't exist right now. And to be able to use an IMSA phrase, be fearless in the face of ambiguity. You know, we watch our students, they'll grab the next techno gadget that comes out next week and think nothing, and we're like, oh, where's the on button? Right? I mean, it's just a natural thing for them to embrace that, and you want that inquisitiveness, that I can do this even though I don't really know it yet approach to the world. So this I put together, and see which classroom you remember. So the teacher at the board versus the teacher at the tables. Teacher having all the fun versus the students doing the math. The other question I've heard people give talks on, who's doing the talking? You know, I'm standing here doing all this talking, and this is not what I do. You know, I should have you engaged. I should have brought, next time I'm coming, I'm bringing that problem for you. And, you know, I remember I felt like I knew where my class was because I had a couple students who would always answer my questions. And, like, then you assume everybody's with those two. Probably not the case, right? And this way, I really do know where everybody is in the classroom. Assessment and evaluation were the same, and now the assessment is really ongoing. You know, any assessment that I give, whether it's formal or informal, in my view, needs to be a learning experience. And so I tell the kids, you know, after they get a quiz back from me, I expect you to make corrections, and I'm going to look at them. And there's a fine line when I grade things then as to how much I write on there, because I want to write enough that they can go in the right direction, but I don't want to just fix the problem for them either. Sometimes that's tricky. But I want them to learn from that. And I said, if you're going to make a mistake on the test, make it a new one. All right? So I can, well, actually Marlene has my PowerPoint, but that is my email if you have questions for me that you don't think of today or you don't like asking in this forum. Please feel free to email me. I'd be happy to respond. But I do want to open it up for those of you who have something to offer. Yeah.
Hi. I'm sorry I was late trying to hand off kids to my husband. So you may have covered this already. First of all, I really admire and I love your passion, your enthusiasm, because it seems like you really believe in the program and you know, and the outcome that it yields. So that's really refreshing. Unfortunately, that hasn't been my experience with the program, and it's been more, I think, frustrating because when you, unlike IMSA, when students, there's an application process, even though there are no testing scores per se. I think it's a cumulative approach to admission at IMSA, I believe. Versus, what I'm saying is that you don't necessarily have to have a certain SAT score or a certain GPA to get into IMSA,
Yeah, there's a pretty extensive admission.
Okay, well,
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
But that kind of proves my point. Well, here there isn't one.
Right.
And so I think because of that, you have kids coming from various schools, various backgrounds, various home lives, where if you're thrown into a program like this, it's really hard to catch up from wherever they came from. So I know of people, who have left because my son, my daughter really could not get with the math program, and there was very little support for that. Fortunately, with my son, he's done well, but I can honestly say that the passion, the excitement, and the program, the way that you have stated, has not been taught like that. It's been very frustrating because while, the teachers are not, maybe presenting it the way that you're saying it, the kids are going to Khan Academy. They're going to Tiger Algebra. They're going to all these other websites to try to understand what they feel is lacking. So I don't know if that's a teacher training issue, so that it can be executed the way the program should be, or just where is the...
All right, so you're getting a lot of ideas. I'm trying to hold them all in my
Yeah.
head. So first I want to go back to our student population. I can tell you, yes, we take the best and brightest from the state of Illinois. However, our accepted class has to mirror the demographic of the applicant pool. And I can tell you that the best and brightest from downstate Illinois does not look the same as it does from the Chicagoland area. Their opportunities to learn K-9 are extremely different than the kids who live in the suburbs. And there are kids who struggle. There are kids who started exactly at the level of the student body here because we administered our placement test to your students, so I know exactly